Shauna, step away from the desk.
What is
Shauna,
this?
the customer
What are you
accounts you've been
doing?
draining for 4 years, signing their names, taking their savings. We have everything.
For 4 years, people handed Shauna Siah their life savings, their account numbers, and their trust. Every single one of them was wrong too.
You have the wrong person. I don't know what you...
$626,000, Shauna. The handbags, the jewelry, the charger.
8 feet wide, lined floor to ceiling with designer handbags still wearing their manufacturer's tags. Over 50 pieces of jewelry arranged in velvet trays. 5 firearms locked in a case on the top shelf. And parked in the driveway outside, a 2009 Dodge Charger paid for with money skimmed from the savings accounts of elderly women on the southern Oregon coast. By the time federal agents finished cataloging every piece of that closet, the personal banker in this footage would be facing 71 months in federal prison and a $626,000 restitution order. Before we go any further, I want you to think about something. The teller you wave at when you walk into your bank, the personal banker who helped your mother open her CD, the woman who knew your father's account number by heart and asked about your kids by name. How well do you actually know that person? Drop your honest answer in the comments. And if you're new to this channel, hit subscribe. We expose authority figures who weaponize trust every single week. Shauna Moore was born in 1973 in Hilo, Hawaii, the second of 3 children to a father who worked the loading docks at a sugar refinery and a mother who took shifts as a nurse's aide at Hilo Medical Center. The Hawaiian middle name, Limomi, meaning Pearl Lay, came from her grandmother on her mother's side, a woman who would press dollar bills into Shauna's palm at every family gathering and tell her, in a thick island accent, that money was the one thing in this life that did not lie to you. The family left Hawaii in 1981 when Shauna was 8. Her father had heard from a cousin that the lumber mills on the southern Oregon coast were hiring, and the wages would go further in a place where nobody charged Hawaii prices for a gallon of milk. They settled in North Bend, a working-class town wedged between a bay and a stretch of sand dunes, 15 minutes north of Coos Bay. Her father took a job at the Weyerhaeuser mill running a forklift on the night shift. Her mother found work at a nursing home off Virginia Avenue, the same kind of facility where, decades later, her daughter's victims would draw their final breaths. She attended North Bend High School, graduating in 1991 with a B- average and a yearbook quote her classmates would later read aloud at parole hearings. The best way to predict your future is to create it. She enrolled at Southwestern Oregon Community College that fall, took 2 years of general business courses, and dropped out 4 credits short of an associate's degree when her first child was born in the spring of 1993. For the next 9 years, she worked the kinds of jobs that pay in 2-week intervals and never quite cover the rent. Cashier at a Fred Meyer in Coos Bay, front desk at a Motel 6 off Highway 101, customer service at a propane company in Reedsport. She married, she divorced, she married again, taking the surname Siah from a second husband, who would later tell investigators he had not seen her in 5 years and had no idea where the handbags came from. She had a second child. The bills got harder. Her mother died in 2004, and the small inheritance, $11,000 and a vinyl record collection, was gone by Christmas. In the summer of 2006, Shauna Siah walked into the Wells Fargo branch at 1350 North Broadway in Coos Bay, Oregon, and filled out an application for a teller position. She was 33 years old. She had a high school diploma, 2 years of community college, and a stack of customer service references from jobs that paid $8 an hour. The branch manager interviewed her on a Tuesday afternoon. He would later tell the FBI that what he remembered most was how easy she was to talk to. how she remembered his daughter's name from the application small talk and asked about her by the end of the interview, how she made him feel in 23 minutes. She was hired the following Monday at $12.40 an hour. Within 11 months, she had been promoted to senior teller. Within 22 months, she had passed her Series 6 securities license and been moved to the front of the house as a personal banker. Within 38 months, she was the assistant branch manager, second in command at a Wells Fargo branch serving roughly 11,000 customers in a town of 15,000 people. Her annual performance reviews, which the United States Attorney's Office would later submit into evidence, described her in language that would become its own kind of indictment. Exceptional rapport with elderly clientele, demonstrates unusual patience with cognitively impaired customers, a natural relationship banker. On her final review, dated February of 2010, her supervisor wrote a single sentence in the comments field. Shauna is the reason our retired clients drive past 3 other banks to come to this one. A personal banker is not a teller. A teller stands behind a counter, cashes checks, deposits paychecks, and never sees the inside of a customer's life. A personal banker sits at a desk in the open floor of the branch behind a low partition with a nameplate and a chair on the customer side of the desk. A personal banker opens accounts, closes accounts, orders replacement debit cards, signs people up for online banking, walks elderly customers through the process of setting up automatic deposits for Social Security checks and pension payments, and the small monthly stipends from a deceased spouse's life insurance. A personal banker has access to account balances, to Social Security numbers, to routing numbers, to the signature card on file, to the address where statements are mailed and the phone number on the contact line. A personal banker can override holds, approve cashier's checks, initiate wire transfers, and process withdrawals for customers who are physically present and customers who are not. A personal banker can do all of this because the federally insured banking system is built on a single load-bearing assumption: that the person sitting across from you, with the name tag and the corporate lanyard and the warm welcome, is on your side. The Wells Fargo branch at 1350 North Broadway is a single-story building on the main commercial strip running through downtown Coos Bay. Across the street is a coffee shop. 2 doors down is a hardware store that has been there since 1958. The customers walk in. They wave at the people behind the counter. They call the staff by first name. Many of them have banked at that branch for 40 years, since before it was a Wells Fargo, back when it was a First Interstate, and back before that, when it was a local outfit. They are retired loggers, retired fishermen, widows of mill workers, disabled veterans from the Korean War, people whose entire financial lives, the deed to the house, the savings for the grandchild's college, the cash for the funeral plot, exist as 4-digit numbers next to their name in a Wells Fargo database that one assistant branch manager could log into from any workstation on the floor. The internal controls at a community branch are not designed to stop the assistant branch manager. They are designed to stop the customer. They are designed to flag a withdrawal too large or a transfer too fast. They are designed to catch the outsider. The insider, the one with the password, and the supervisor override, and the elderly customer who cannot quite read the form she is signing. The insider is the system, and in Coos Bay, between 2006 and 2010, the insider was Shauna Siah. The first withdrawal, the one federal prosecutors would later identify as the founding act of the scheme, happened on a Thursday morning in October of 2006. Shauna had been at the bank for 6 weeks. She had been moved off the teller line and onto the personal banker desk 3 days earlier. An 81-year-old widow named Marjorie came in to deposit a Social Security check and to ask about whether she needed to do anything special for the holidays. Shauna helped her with the deposit, walked her through her balance, refilled her stack of complimentary deposit slips, and while Marjorie was looking at the framed school photos on the corner of the desk, copied her account number and her signature onto a Post-it note she would take home that evening. 3 weeks later, $340 was withdrawn from Marjorie's checking account at the same branch by an in-person teller transaction. The signature on the withdrawal slip matched the one on file. The teller who processed it did not look up. There was no reason to. The supervisor who approved it was the assistant branch manager, the personal banker, the woman who had been at that desk for 6 weeks. Marjorie did not notice the missing money. Her Social Security check had just hit. Her balance was higher than it had been the week before, just slightly less higher than it should have been. This was the template. Identify a customer who would not check. Build a relationship strong enough that the customer would not question. Withdraw amounts small enough that any single transaction looked routine. And then, when the relationship was deep enough, when the customer trusted Shauna more than she trusted her own children, escalate. Federal investigators would eventually identify 19 customers as direct victims, with another 47 flagged as possible victims whose losses could not be conclusively traced. The customers ranged in age from 68 to 91. Several had documented cognitive decline. 2 had been diagnosed with early Alzheimer's. 1 was legally blind. 1 was a fully disabled Vietnam veteran living on a monthly VA stipend. The smallest single theft was $86 from an elderly woman's checking account. The largest was an $87,000 transfer out of a retirement money market account, belonging to a retired logging foreman whose wife had died 11 months earlier, and who had told Shauna on 3 separate occasions that he no longer trusted himself to read the statements. The money went to 2 places. The first was the Mill Casino in North Bend, a tribal gaming hall 10 minutes up Highway 101, operated by the Coquille Indian tribe. Surveillance footage subpoenaed by the FBI would eventually show Shauna at the slot machines and the blackjack tables between 3 and 5 nights per week, sometimes for 6 or 7 hours at a stretch, sometimes leaving at 4 in the morning to drive back to Coos Bay in time to shower and change for the 8 a.m. branch opening. Her win-loss statements, requested through tribal compliance, showed cumulative losses across the 4-year period of just over $410,000. The second place was retail, specifically designer handbags and jewelry. 3-hour drives north on Highway 101 to the Washington Square Mall in Tigard. Day trips to the Bridgeport Village in Lake Oswego. Online orders to Neiman Marcus, Nordstrom, and Saks Fifth Avenue. Louis Vuitton, Coach, Michael Kors, Gucci, Burberry, Tiffany, David Yurman. By the time federal agents searched her home in October of 2010, the bedroom closet would contain over 50 pieces of jewelry, dozens of designer handbags, many of them still wearing the manufacturer's tags, never carried, never used, never even worn out of the closet, and a tally of receipts that totaled, by the FBI's accounting, more than $190,000. And then there was Peter Lund's wife. Peter Lund was a retired commercial fisherman in his 70s, married for 44 years to a woman named Carolyn. Caroline had banked at the North Broadway branch since the Carter administration. Caroline had been one of Shauna's first cultivated relationships. Tuesday afternoon coffees at the diner across the street, holiday cards, framed photos on the corner of the personal banker's desk. Caroline trusted Shauna with a kind of completeness that her own children no longer earned. And when Caroline started to notice that the joint checking account she shared with Peter was running shorter than it should have, Shauna sat her down across the desk and in a soft and worried voice told her she had been wanting to talk about this for a while. She told Caroline that Peter had been coming into the branch alone, that he had been making cash withdrawals, that he had been buying things he did not want Caroline to know about, that she had seen him at the casino, that she had heard through the back channels of a small town, that the kids were involved too, that the grandkids were running through the savings. She told Caroline that she was telling her this because she loved her, because she did not want Caroline to be the last to know, because Caroline deserved better. Caroline went home that evening and did not speak to her husband for 3 days. By the end of the month, Caroline had instructed Shauna to remove Peter from the joint account's online access on the grounds that he was not to be trusted with it. The second to last withdrawal Shauna would ever take from Caroline Lund's account, 18 days before the audit, was $31,400. The funds were transferred to a Wells Fargo account in Shauna's son's name that Shauna had opened without her son's knowledge. From there, they were withdrawn in cash, in 3 trips to 3 different branches, over a span of 9 days. The end began with a phone call on a Monday morning in August of 2010. An elderly woman named Dolores, 83 years old, called the Wells Fargo branch on North Broadway because her statement said her checking account balance was $412 and her checkbook said it should be $6,180. The teller who answered the phone listened to Dolores describe the discrepancy 3 times, transferred her to the branch manager, and then quietly went back to the break room and told 2 other employees that she had been wondering about something for a while. When the branch manager pulled Dolores's account history that afternoon, he found 17 separate withdrawals over a 14-month period that Dolores had no memory of making. All of them processed in person, all of them with a signature that, on visual inspection, looked nearly identical to the signature card on file. All of them approved by the same supervisor override code. The override code belonging to the assistant branch manager. The branch manager called Wells Fargo's corporate investigative unit that night. Within 72 hours, a forensic auditor from the bank's loss prevention division was on a flight from Charlotte to Eugene. Within 5 business days, the auditor had pulled the account histories of every customer Shauna Siah had served as personal banker since 2006 and had begun cross-referencing in-person withdrawal slips against signature cards, surveillance footage against transaction timestamps, and supervisor overrides against the schedule of who had been on the floor at the time. By the end of the 2nd week, the auditor's preliminary report identified approximately $800,000 in suspectivity across roughly 60 customer accounts. The number would eventually climb to $1.2 million in flagged transactions before plea negotiations narrowed the admitted figure to $626,553. And then the auditor found something else. A pattern of new accounts opened in customers' names that the customers had never asked for, never authorized, and in some cases were entirely unaware of. Checking accounts, savings accounts, lines of credit, all opened under the assistant branch manager's employee ID, all generating internal commissions and quarterly bonuses tied to a Wells Fargo cross-sell incentive program. The bank was, at that exact moment in 2010, 6 years away from a national scandal that would expose this practice as systemic across thousands of branches. In Coos Bay, in August of 2010, it was simply one more piece of evidence in a folder that was getting thicker by the day. Shauna Siah was called into the branch manager's office on a Thursday afternoon. She was informed that she was being placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of an internal investigation. Her badge was collected. Her supervisor codes were revoked. She was walked to her car by a regional security officer. 11 days later, the leave was converted to termination. Wells Fargo referred the matter to the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Oregon and to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. If this is hitting different, take 10 seconds to subscribe. We cover these cases, the trusted ones, the inside jobs, the people who weaponize their access, every single week. Mainstream news ran a press release on this case. We are running the whole file. Hit the bell so you do not miss the next one. The federal arrest warrant for Shauna Siah was issued by the United States District Court for the District of Oregon on October 27, 2010. The charges, drafted by Assistant United States Attorney Sean B. Hoare, ran across multiple statutes: identity theft, aggravated identity theft, credit card fraud, wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering. The warrant authorized federal agents to enter and search her residence on a quiet residential street in Coos Bay, the small ranch-style rental house she had been leasing for the past 3 years. At 6:42 a.m. on the morning of October 28th, agents from the FBI's Eugene Resident Agency, joined by deputies from the Coos County Sheriff's Office, executed the search warrant. Shauna Siah was not home. Her 2 children, ages 16 and 7, were not home. The Dodge Charger was in the driveway. The house was unlocked. What the agents found in the master bedroom closet became, in the federal prosecutor's later phrasing, the receipts of a 4-year embezzlement. The closet was 8 feet wide. The hanging bar ran the full width and was crowded so densely with garment bags that the door barely closed. On the floor, in neat rows, were designer handbags: Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Coach, Burberry, Michael Kors, Tory Burch, many of them still in their original dust bags, many of them still wearing the manufacturer's price tags. The agents counted on the initial walkthrough 48 handbags. The final inventory would put the number above 60. On the top shelf, in a locked metal case, were 5 firearms, 2 handguns, 2 long guns, and a small revolver. In the dresser drawers, in jewelry boxes, in a fireproof safe in the corner of the closet, were over 50 pieces of jewelry: Tiffany, David Yurman, a 2.5-carat diamond solitaire, a men's Rolex, a David Yurman cable bracelet set still on its display card, pearl earrings, sapphire pendants, most of it never worn, some of it still in the original packaging. The Dodge Charger was a 2009 model, midnight blue, fully loaded. The title was in Shauna Siah's name. The financing paperwork found in a folder in the kitchen showed she had paid for it in cash, $29,400, walked into a Roseburg dealership the previous summer with a brown paper grocery bag of $100 bills, picked out the car, and driven it off the lot the same afternoon. She had told the salesman she was a small business owner. She had told the salesman she did not want financing because she did not believe in debt. Shauna Siah was not at the house because Shauna Siah had run. When the FBI's case agent later interviewed her, she would describe the moment she knew the search was coming as the day her termination letter arrived from Wells Fargo. She had assumed that a federal arrest warrant would not be far behind. She had packed 2 duffel bags. She had withdrawn what cash she could from accounts that were still hers, and she had begun, in the weeks before the warrant was signed, to move from place to place in a way she believed federal agents would not be able to trace. She drove south. She crossed into California. She stayed first at a motel in Crescent City, then a motel in Eureka. Then she did something that federal prosecutors would later describe in their sentencing memorandum as one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire case. She began checking herself into domestic violence shelters. She did not have a documented history of domestic violence. She had no police reports, no protection orders, no medical records to support a claim. But she had a story she could tell, a story she would refine from shelter to shelter. And she had enough conviction in the telling to be admitted. She moved through 3 different shelters across 3 different California counties over the span of approximately 5 weeks. Each one provided her with a bed, with meals, with privacy, with anonymity, and, most importantly, with the strict confidentiality protocols that domestic violence shelters maintain to protect their actual residents. Prosecutors would later argue, at sentencing, that her decision to hide inside the domestic violence shelter system had taken beds, counseling hours, and case management resources away from women who genuinely needed them. The judge would agree. The FBI's case agent, working with the United States Marshals Service, eventually traced Siah to the Los Angeles area through a combination of debit card pings, hotel registration matches, and a tip from a shelter intake worker who had grown suspicious of inconsistencies in her story. On December 27, 2010, 2 months and 1 day after the original warrant was issued, Shauna Siah walked into the lobby of the FBI's Los Angeles field office on Wilshire Boulevard with an attorney she had hired 3 days earlier and surrendered. The surrender was, by all accounts, anticlimactic. There was no chase. There was no door being kicked in. There was a 38-year-old black woman in jeans and a hooded sweatshirt carrying a single duffel bag, walking into a federal building on a Monday afternoon with her hands at her sides and her attorney 3 steps behind her. She approached the front desk. She gave her name. The desk officer made a phone call. 3 minutes later, 2 FBI agents and a U.S. Marshal came down to the lobby. The lead case agent, in his post-arrest interview notes filed with the United States District Court, recorded the brief exchange that took place in the lobby before she was processed. The exchange was short. The exchange was, in many ways, the only words Shauna Siah spoke to federal agents that were not later filtered through her defense attorney. Agent: Are you Shauna Limomi Siah, also known as Shauna Moore? Siah: I am. Agent: Ma'am, you are under arrest pursuant to a federal warrant issued by the United States District Court for the District of Oregon. Do you understand? Siah: I do. Agent: Anything you want to say before we proceed? Siah: I am sorry it took this long. I have been very tired. She was processed, fingerprinted, photographed, transferred into the custody of the U.S. Marshals Service. She was held at the Metropolitan Detention Center in downtown Los Angeles for 11 days before being transported back to Oregon by federal marshals on a commercial flight. She would not see daylight outside of a federal facility again for the next 4 years. Shauna Limomi Siah appeared before Chief United States District Judge Ann Aiken in the federal courthouse in Eugene, Oregon, on May 12, 2011. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of bank fraud in exchange for the dismissal of the remaining counts of identity theft, aggravated identity theft, credit card fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. The plea agreement required her to admit, on the record, to having stolen $626,553 from Wells Fargo customer accounts between October of 2006 and August of 2010. It required her to forfeit the 2009 Dodge Charger, the 5 firearms, the over 50 pieces of jewelry, and the dozens of designer handbags. It required her to cooperate fully with Wells Fargo's internal restitution process, and it left the question of her sentence to the judge. Sentencing was held on September 21st, 2011. The courtroom was full. 3 of the elderly victims were in attendance, 2 of them accompanied by adult children, 1 of them in a wheelchair. Caroline Lund was there. So was Peter Lund. They sat together. They had been reconciled, according to Caroline's victim impact statement, for approximately 7 months. 7 months that did not undo the 18 months Caroline had spent believing her husband of 44 years was stealing from her. Assistant United States Attorney Sean B. Hoare argued for a sentence at the high end of the federal guidelines. In his sentencing memorandum and his oral argument, he laid out the case the defendant's actions had built against her: the cultivated relationships, the targeted vulnerability, the manipulation of Caroline Lund into believing her own husband was the thief, the flight, the use of domestic violence shelters as a hiding place, the dozens of handbags lined up in the closet, still wearing tags. He used in open court, on the record, a single word to describe the defendant. He called her a sociopath. He used the word twice. He did not retract it. The defense attorney argued for a downward departure. He spoke at length about Shauna Siah's gambling addiction. He cited expert testimony characterizing pathological gambling as a recognized mental health disorder. He described her childhood, her divorces, the death of her mother, the financial pressures of raising 2 children alone on a personal banker's salary. He noted that she had cooperated with investigators. He noted that she had surrendered voluntarily. He noted that she had no prior criminal history. Caroline Lund spoke. Her statement was read from a folded piece of paper that she held in both hands. She did not look at Shauna Siah. She looked at the judge. She described 18 months of believing her husband had betrayed her. She described the conversation she had refused to have with him. She described the silent dinners. She described telling her adult children that their father was not the man they thought he was. She described, in the most quiet sentence of the entire afternoon, the moment a federal agent had sat across from her at her own kitchen table and told her that none of it had ever been true, that her husband had not stolen a single dollar, that the woman she had trusted had been the thief the whole time. She said on the record that she did not know if she would ever fully forgive herself for the way she had treated her husband. She said, on the record, that she did not know if she would ever fully trust anyone again. Shauna Siah spoke last. She stood. She turned partway toward the victims. She said she was sorry. She said she had not understood, in the moment, how much harm she was doing. She said the gambling had been an addiction she had not been able to stop. She said she was prepared to accept whatever sentence the court imposed. She sat down. Judge Ann Aiken spoke for approximately 11 minutes. She addressed Shauna Siah directly. She acknowledged the gambling addiction. She acknowledged the absence of a prior record. And then she said, in language that would be quoted in 3 separate Oregon newspapers the following morning, that the addiction did not explain the cruelty, that stealing from elderly women was one crime, and convincing a woman of 44 years that her husband was the thief was a separate crime, and the second crime was the one she could not get past. She said that the defendant had used the language and the resources of domestic violence shelters, institutions designed to protect women in crisis, to hide from federal agents, and that this fact alone would weigh on the court's decision. She said that she would encourage the defendant to seek meaningful treatment for her gambling addiction during her incarceration. And she said that the sentence she was about to impose was intended to reflect the seriousness of the offense, the harm to the victims, and the need for deterrence to anyone in a similar position of trust. She sentenced Shauna Siah to 71 months in federal prison, 5 years and 11 months. She ordered restitution in the full admitted amount of $626,553, payable to Wells Fargo, which had already made every one of the elderly victims financially whole. She ordered 5 years of supervised release following the prison term. She ordered the forfeiture of the Dodge Charger, the firearms, the jewelry, and the handbags, all of which would be sold at federal auction with proceeds applied to restitution. Shauna Siah was remanded to the custody of the United States Marshals Service. She was transferred, after intake processing, to the Federal Correctional Institution at Dublin, California, a low-security women's facility in the East Bay run by the Federal Bureau of Prisons. She was assigned to a housing unit. She enrolled in the residential gambling treatment program. She was released to supervised release in the spring of 2016, having served roughly 58 months of her 71-month sentence, with credit for good time. The Wells Fargo branch at 1350 North Broadway in Coos Bay is still open. The personal banker desk is still there. The chair on the customer side of the desk is still there. The elderly clientele, fewer of them now, the years having done what years do, still drive past 3 other banks to come to this one. The framed school photos on the corner of the desk belong to someone else's children now. The nameplate has been changed 3 times. The branch manager who hired Shauna Siah in 2006 retired in 2014. He has never, in any interview, in any public statement, in any sworn deposition, used her name out loud. Caroline Lund and Peter Lund remained married. Caroline died in 2017, 6 years after the sentencing, of natural causes. Peter outlived her by 2 years. The handbags went to federal auction in the spring of 2012. They were sold in a single lot to a wholesale buyer out of Portland for approximately $31,000, a fraction of their retail value. The jewelry was sold separately. The Dodge Charger was sold separately. The firearms were destroyed. The proceeds, every dollar of them, were applied to a restitution balance that, even after the auctions, was nowhere near the $626,553 the court had ordered. Wells Fargo absorbed the difference. The elderly customers, none of whom lost a single permanent dollar to the woman they had trusted, never got the apology they had been waiting for. The trusted woman from the bank does not write apology letters. The trusted woman from the bank served her time and was released to supervised parole, and the rest of the bill remains, technically, unpaid. This case was disturbing on a different level, but the case right here on your screen is somehow worse. Click it now.